harvest of Aglianico del Vulture is one of the latest in Italy. Is also one of the most beautiful in Italy because take place at the end of October. So we also have a very unique weather because we are in the south, but we have a very cold winter also with the snow. And during the winter, the porosity of the soil, because we still have volcanic soil, store the water during the winter and use this water during the very warm summer because for Aglianico del Vulture, the irrigation is not allowed. So it's a very unique area that makes a very unique grape.
Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today we travel to Basilicata in southern Italy and to the slopes of the extinct volcano of Vulture to meet my guest Erminia D'Angelo, who together with her brother Rocco represents the fourth generation of Casa Vinicola D'Angelo, one of the historical wine estates of Basilicata. Buongiorno, Erminia. Many thanks for being our guest today. How are you? And is it a beautiful day in Rio Nero del Vulture?
Buongiorno, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and to talk about my beautiful region and my beautiful winery. We are located in Basilicata, a small and unique region located in the heart of the south of Italy between Puglia and Campania. We are located in the north part of the region, inside a beautiful area dominated by the Vulture, an extinct volcano. It is at 1,300 meters above sea level and has 7 beautiful hills. What were once the volcanoes creates are now 2 standing volcanic lakes. Stretching across the slopes of the Vulture are the vineyards of Aglianico del Vulture, the indigenous grape variety of the region. Is a very unique area because the lava of the volcano mixed with the soil rich in calcium and tuff creates a terroir perfect for Aglianico vines and olive trees. The volcanic soil, rich of potassium, give freshness, flavors, and minerality to our very unique wines.
Okay, Erminia, let me just stop you there and reiterate to our listeners what a unique land this is. This very big, extinct volcano that gently slopes down, a very high volcano, as you said. What is the height, the altitudine di Vulture?
The altitude of the Vulture is 1,300 meters above sea level.
Okay, and so then we've got the vines reaching up quite high. But I just want our listeners to appreciate that Basilicata and describing Vulture, it seems a remote land today, but it's a very ancient land, and it was once at the center of Greek, Roman, medieval civilization. The great poet Horatio was from nearby Venosa, and he wrote odes to wine, most famously urging his friend and indeed urging us all today to strain the wine and seize the day, carpe diem. And in medieval times too, Federico II, Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, known as Lo Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, had fortified castles across the region. And Erminia, the vine has always been here, hasn't it? At least since the time of the ancient Greeks.
Yes, Aglianico is believed to have been introduced by the Greek in the 6th century before Christ.
Okay.
The name of the grape is Aglianico del Vulture because of the Vulture. So for this, you can find this grape only in our region. Aglianico del
Okay.
Vulture is a specific, unique grape that the Greek imported in our area.
Okay. Now, Erminia, I visited your family winery a very, very long time ago and met your father and your uncle when I was researching a book, The Wine Roads of Italy. And your family, the Casa Vinicola D'Angelo, has long been a important point of reference for the wines of Basilicata, and in particular, a champion of this wine that you're describing, this unique Basilicata's greatest wine, Aglianico del Vulture. But can you first of all tell us something of the story of Casa Vinicola D'Angelo?
I represent with my brother Rocco the fourth generation of one of the historical winery in Basilicata because the winery was born in the 1920 and the founder was my great grandfather. So a journey into the world of winemaking that spans over four generations, all the way to my brother and me. The main activities in the 1920 were the production and the sale of the grape Aglianico del Vulture to the winery of the north part of Italy because they used Aglianico as blending wine to give more body, structure, color and alcohol to the wines of the north of the Italy. My grandfather Rocco started to bottle wine with our brand and our label in the 1961. In the 1976, thanks to my father Lucio, we were the first winery to start to export Aglianico del Vulture outside Italy. At that time, the main markets were the US and the German market. So year by year and vintage by vintage, we increase the sales outside of Italy. And today, the winery exported 85% of our wines. My brother and I grew up playing between barrels and barrique, and we grew up
Yeah.
and the passion for this world, this wonderful world, grew up with us. My parents' home is on the last floor of the winery. So my favorite memories are when during the harvest, when all the family got together, it was like a kind of a celebration. So we decided very young to follow the passion for the wine, for this job that we inherited from our father Lucio.
That's a really, really important story you're relating, that the wines of Basilicata and this great Aglianico del Vulture with your great grandfather was sold either as wine or the grapes went up to the north of Italy to add body and color and alcohol to wines that were lacking that. But it was your family that began, did you say your grandfather who began to bottle the Aglianico del Vulture in the 60s, so very early on. And I remember when I visited Erminia that a lot of the vines were in the area were very, very old vines growing on this volcanic soil, perhaps even pre-Philosopher wines. And there were often small growers who tended the vines. Often at that time when I visited, they were very old and they were selling the grapes, or your family were working with families to get the best grapes from the higher vineyards to produce your Aglianico del Vulture. And now, from those beginnings of selling the wine in bulk to be blended in the north, your wine, the Casa Vinicola D'Angelo Aglianico del Vulture, is considered one of the great wines of Italy. I've just met you last month in Verona, where you were presenting your wines at Opera Wine, which is a great gathering of about 130 producers, they producing the best and most representative wines from all over Italy as selected by the Wine Spectator. So your family has really helped to put the wines of Basilicata on the map.
Thank you.
Erminia, tell us more about the Aglianico as it grows on Vulture. I remember when I visited, some of the growers were still using an old-fashioned method of training, using the canes to prop up the vines almost in a teepee sort of style. And I know that a wine we'll discuss later is linked to that. You're very well-known Canetto wine. So there's still a lot of old vines on the Vulture, aren't there?
Yes, we have 25 hectares of vineyards located in the heart of the Vulture, on the slopes of the Vulture. We make many labels. The difference is the age of the vines that they come from, because we have our younger vines that are 25 years old, our oldest vines that are more than 80 years old. We have 1 hectare of vineyard planted in the 1941. So for this, we have wines, all 100% Aglianico, but are different from one from to another for the age of the vines and the aging process. The Canneto is one of the historical wines that we have because represent the history of the winery. The first vintage of Canneto was in the 1985. This wine is the only our wine that is aged in a French barrique. We were in the 1985 the first winery in Basilicata started to use the barrique for the aging process of Aglianico del Vulture. So we never change the making process of this wine. We use the barrique to make the Aglianico more soft, to accelerate the macro oxygenation of this wine. This wine, year by year and vintage by vintage, became the most popular wine of the winery.
Yes, I remember that well. And, I think I visited you in those early years, and it may have been in 1989. And of course, this was an era when it's not that long prior to that Barrique became introduced in Tuscany for the super Tuscan wines. So your family were real pioneers in bringing use of French oak to Basilicata to make, if the Tuscan wines were super Tuscans, Canetto certainly was a super Basilicata wine. But the main production is your Aglianico del Vulture. Now, that's a wine I've long been able to enjoy here in the UK. I even have a local wine merchant, Christopher Piper, that has long stocked the D'Angelo Aglianico del Vulture. And I know you work with the excellent Wine Society as well. This is such a classic Aglianico del Vulture. And I think it's important that our listeners understand Aglianico del Vulture is very distinct and different from Aglianico from Torazi or from Taburno, for example. It has a unique character that comes from the terroir, come from the Vulture. Tell us about your Aglianico del Vulture.
Aglianico del Vulture, yes, is the most popular wine that we have because Arso was the first our wine that we started to export because when the Aglianico del Vulture became a DOC, we started to export this wine. So it is nice to see when I travel that this wine has an history around the world because all the people very know this label and this wine. I think that this wine has all the typical characteristic of Aglianico del Vulture. That is, as you told, is a very unique grape, completely different from the Aglianico from the other region, also for the terroir. Also because the harvest of Aglianico del Vulture is one of the latest in Italy, is also one of the most beautiful in Italy because take place at the end of October. So we also have a very unique weather because we are in the south. but we have a very cold winter, also with the snow. And during the winter, the porosity of the soil, because we still have volcanic soil, store the water during the winter and use this water during the very warm summer, because for Aglianico del Vulture, the irrigation is not allowed. So it's very important the composition of the soil and the weather for the maturation of grape. Also during the summer, there is a range between 19 days of 10 degrees that helps the vine during the maturation during the summer. So it's a very unique area that makes a very unique grape, the Aglianico del Vulture.
Actually, that's a very important point. You know, I think it's easy for listeners to consider Basilicata in the far south of Italy and that it's always going to be hot. I remember visiting, I think it was November, and it was already very cold, and the harvest had only just taken place that year. And I think it was your father who told me that Potenza has winters as cold as Bolzano in the north. And you know, we tend to think that the south is always hot, but it's a very different climate to much of the rest of southern Italy on the slopes of the volcano. And of course, it's the altitude of the vines as well. The vines for your top wines come from the higher slopes, don't they? Above Barile, above Rio Nero.
Yeah, in Rio Nero, where the winery is located, we are 600 meters above the sea level.
Okay.
We have part of our vines are located in Barile, that is the more classical area of production of Aglianico del Vulture. The vines are between 300 and 400 meters above sea level.
Okay.
So it's very high.
Very high, and that's very much a factor, along with the mix of terrains that this volcanic soil that's eroded over thousands of years gives this minerality it gives to the vines. Let's just have another look at the Canetto because this is such a special wine, and I do want our listeners to look out for it. First made in 1989. So you're taking some of the best Aglianico grapes. I know the yields are very low in your area. Is that right? And you're using this to age in barrique just to give a little bit of roundness and to take some of the harsher edges of Aglianico. Is that what the barrique does? It smooths out the wine a bit?
The vines of Canneto are more than 40 years old, are located in Barile. As I told you, is the more classical area of production of Aglianico del Vulture. All the harvest take place by hand. So we decide to keep the same traditional making process that we inherited from our father. Our mission is to continuing the traditional approach to winemaking this wine. We use for the refinement the concrete tanks, for the maturation only concrete tanks, for the aging second year passage barrique. So the testing of the barrique is very soft. We use the second year passage barrique because we would like to have a wine, a elegant version of Aglianico del Vulture. Usually the Canneto is aged in barrique for 18 months, 6 months in the bottle before to be ready to sell. Is one of our best seller, best wine. All the people know this wine, and it's nice because once I was in the States for my business trip, and all the customers gave me a gift. It was my bottle of Canneto Vintage 1985. So the first
Oh my
vintage of
goodness.
Canneto.
Wow.
It was amazing
Yeah.
to see that the people know this wine. Also, they started to sell the first vintage
Yes.
of this
Amazing.
wine. It's also my special wine because I was born in the 1985, like the
Oh,
Caneto.
okay.
So it's my
Yes,
special wine.
yes, and made by your father then.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. Now I know at Casa Vinicola D'Angelo you produce a full range of wines, whites and sparkling wines as well. But I'd like to turn now to the gastronomy of Basilicata, about the cucina tipica of Basilicata. And I'd just like you to share with our listeners what are some of the key dishes, the local foods, the piatti tipici that every visitor who comes to Basilicata should try and sample, and which of your wines, perhaps wines we haven't discussed, wines on your list that you think pair particularly well with some local foods. Can you share with us some piatti tipici and wine pairings?
The main ingredient is peperone crusco, a dried and crunchy pepper known for its sweet flavor and intense color, which is a popular element in the local cuisine. The peppers usually it's served with oat-made pasta, the mollicata, so such as cavatelli, strascinati, or ferretti. So we made this pasta with bread, sauce, and peperone crusco. So it's one of the typical dish from Basilicata.
So that would be with the bread, the old bread mixed with the pepperoni crusca, did you
Cruschi,
say?
yeah.
Cruschi. Oh, I didn't know that. And it's not picante then, it's a sweet pepper.
But now it's very common to find the pepperoni cruschi around the world because usually because the first thing that usually the people ask at me when I travel to promote my wines is where we can pair this wine. Usually we organize a wine dinner during my trip, and we sometimes we try to reply the typical dishes from Basilicata. And now it's very easy to find also the pepperoni cruschi around the world.
Oh, I've never seen that. And what would the pasta dish be called that's made with the mollica and the pepperoni cruschi?
The name of the dish is mollicata. Is an
Mollicata.
handmade pasta,
Okay.
usually strascinati,
Yeah.
dish based with breadcrumbs.
Okay. So a real
Yeah.
dish of the cucina povero.
Yes, it's considered a poor dish.
Yes, it sounds delicious. What wine would you
Exactly.
pair with that, Erminia?
You can pair with our traditional Aglianico del Vulture, the DOC, but also with Canneto.
With Canetto. Okay. Any other dishes that our listeners should try to sample when they come to the region?
Of course, we have a lot of meat, so we also cook the wild boar. Is very common in Basilicata.
Okay. In umido, sort of a long slow
Exactly,
cook. Okay. And again, that would be wonderful with the Aglianico wines.
exactly. More complex are the wines, and more complex to be the food.
Would you cook the pepperoni cruschi with the meat as well?
Not. Usually we cook the pepperoni cruschi with the codfish.
Ah, with the bacala.
Yes, another typical dish is fried pepperoni cruschi with the fried codfish. Is a very
Okay.
typical dish from the region because it's
Okay.
the only fish that we have.
Okay. This is from the
Yeah,
salt cod. And again, a full flavor. I imagine that the red wine, the Aglianico del Vulture, would also
exactly,
pair well with the bacala.
exactly.
Okay.
Bacala with pepperoni cruschi.
Yes, that sounds fantastic. Erminia, I'm sure we're making our listeners want to come to Basilicata and discover this unknown wineland. I know it's not widely visited, but it's such a unique and important part of the Italian wine scene. Can our listeners visit Casa Vinicolo d'Angelo?
Yeah, of course, the people can come and visit the winery. We offer different mini tours, including the visiting of the winery, and of course, at the end of the tour, we do the testing in our barrels room, where we pair Aglianico with the typical dishes from Basilicata, because I think that to really enjoy the wines, you have to pair with some typical food from the area. We have many label, many wines. Usually, we focus the testing on our 100% Aglianico. We have three tour: silver, gold, and platinum. In the platinum, there are also our top wines like Caselle and Tecum. Tecum is the latest born of the winery, because it comes from our oldest vines, 1 hectare of vineyard located in Maschito, that we planted in the 1941. Tecum from Latin mean with you. So it's a wine in memory of our father, and the first vintage of this unique wine was in the 2013. We have a very small production of this wine, because we make this wine only during the excellent vintages, and the production is just 5,000 bottles yearly. So we offer a tour that includes also the tasting of this unique wine.
Okay, that sounds a really fabulous options for our listeners. I've not had a chance to taste the Tecum, so I look forward to tasting that. I look forward to revisiting. It's been far too long. As I say, it was many, many years ago.
You are welcome to come. Also, because last year the winery opened a new tasting room, part of a project to expand hospitality facilities, and also the greater numbers of people that come in Basilicata year by year. So year by year, we have more visitors in Basilicata, more people interested in the Vulture and in the beautiful cities that we have in Basilicata. We also have in Basilicata one of the historical city in the south of Italy, Matera.
Ah, yes.
That, yes, is a very unique city, ancient city in the south.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good showcase of Basilicata. There's so much to offer. There's history and castles and beautiful landscapes, and of course, beautiful wines. Erminia, thank you so much for being with us this morning, for sharing the story of Casa Vinicola D'Angelo and explaining what makes the Aglianico del Vulture so unique, such a special wine. It's a real pleasure to talk to you this morning. I look forward to seeing you again, perhaps at Opera next year, Opera Wine, but I would even like more to try to find a way to come down to Basilicata to visit. So thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. I really hope to welcome you in the winery again, because maybe I was very young when you came.
Yes,
So I don't
I think
remember.
you would
I'm
have been.
sorry.
Yes,
So I
yes.
really hope you can welcome you again in the Vulture.
Okay, grazie. I hope so too.
Grazie.
Grazie. Buona giornata.
Buona giornata. Ciao Mark.
Ciao, ciao. We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at ItalianWinePodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.